Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you had a great coffee break. I hope some of you managed to get into some of the networking sessions. Others hope you got to stretch your legs at least and enjoyed the main stage discussion this morning. Really exciting discussion. I can see we've got lots of people coming in, over 100 already. Knew this session would be popular, so it's great that we've got plenty of folks coming in. As you can see from the billing, we're all about the social value model. This session, we're all about the social value model and the changes that have come this year, and we've got an absolutely stellar cast of panelists coming in later in the session. We've got Mike from EY, Kate Samtaler, do lots of really interesting work with a wide range of organisations, different sizes. Becky from Sodexo, who hasn't been able to escape for me. We did a similar panel last year. And Sam, really delighted to have Sam from the Cabinet Office, who's been instrumental in moving forward with some of those changes this year. So we're going to get into all of that. And today, my challenge for our panelists is to really bring to life some of those changes. What are they? What are their implications for bidders and for buyers as well? So we're going to get into all of that. Before we do that, I'm just teasing you with the panelists because we're going to have a little bit of time up front where actually I'm curious to find out a bit more about who we've got in the room, in our 200 strong audience in the room. So to do that, I'm going to ask people please to either scan that QR code. That should be hopefully super easy on a mobile phone, or just open a separate browser. Careful not to close this browser and go to slido.com and type in the code 2222345. So slido.com and type in the code 2222345. So I'm hoping that will work for people. I'll leave it there for just a couple more seconds, but colleague Chris will pop in the chat those details for anyone who's just joining. And what people should see now is a question. What sector are you here representing? Great, that's exactly what I want to see. Some answers. Okay, so we've got 90 answers through so far, nearly 100. Excellent. Okay, so I'm really glad to see we've got representation across sectors. It's really good news. We've got 17% from the public sector, brilliant. Really want to talk about some of the implications for buyers. A big majority of them from the private sector, absolutely understandable. I know lots of businesses in the private sector thinking very carefully about the social value model and what the implications are. And crucially, we've also got a good number of third sector or voluntary community enterprise partners. So I'm really glad to see that. We're going to try and bring through all of those perspectives as we go through the conversation. And what I'm going to do now, so if you keep that Slido open, whether you've got it on a phone or a browser, we are going to come back to that. But what I'm going to do now is just give you a bit of a provocation before we do, and then I'm going to get your thoughts. In the meantime, if I could just ask panelists to make sure you're on mute to avoid any background noise. So, provocation. We have a new social value model, and there are some changes. One of the biggies is missions. This new model is linked to our 5 core government missions. So real shift. This is about a Labour government saying we see social value as an enabler to our core business as a government, to our core commitments that we have made to voters. So look, that is big, and we're going to get into that today in more detail. What does that mean? Beneath that, of course, we've got a new a model, i.e. a framework to guide all central government procurement activities around social value that is updated. And that has new outcomes, and then beneath those outcomes, and there's far too many to put on the slide, new model award criteria, and that's the real practical stuff. That's the questions, of course, that our bidders will be responding to. And as you can see, there's outcomes that mirror some of the previous outcomes in the old model. There's new outcomes, and there's new emphasis as well. So skills for growth, there's more coming through around jobs and skills, creating a pipeline of opportunities for future contract workforce, really interesting new outcome in there, and model reward criteria beneath those. We've also got supporting the reduction in crime, and beneath that a new model award criteria around domestic abuse. So some real actual tangible changes in content within the model that flows from those 5 missions. And then around that, there is, of course, a wider policy context that's framing these shifts. So we've got, yes, the new PPN. We've also got new guidance. I was just in a networking group before this session with one of the colleagues from Cabinet Office who wrote the guidance. So really exciting new guidance that's really around, okay, well, the model is the what, but this is how do we implement it? And then, of course, PPN 001 and PPN 003, 2 really interesting bits of policy around that. PPN 001 around SME and VCSE procurement spend, which is obviously a real focus in the Procurement Act. 003, an update to the Social Value Act, just to bring it in line with the new approach. And then we've also got a national procurement policy statement that makes the strategic ambitions for procurement really, really clear. So look, all of that, there's loads of information in that, loads of detail. But what I've done, what our panelists have done, is try and bring out some of the key shifts that this new social value model is moving us towards. We've pulled out 6, and other shifts are available. And please do share some of those in the chat as we go through the session. But we've pulled out 6 which we think are a really interesting starting point, and they are: so greater strategic alignment of social value with government's core missions. I've already talked to that, and it's really, really interesting shift between the old and the new. A greater focus on jobs and skills. That is clear in the new model as it stands, but people will also be aware that there has been a consultation that has been run. It's now closed, so we're waiting for the conclusions, that was also exploring further strengthening the focus on jobs and skills by requiring a question on jobs and skills for contracts of above 5 million. So that's also a really kind of interesting shift. And we know if you listen to the news and you hear government talking, that focus on jobs and skills as a lever for economic growth is really coming through loud and clear. Also really interesting one around streamlining requirements. And I put on the page one example of how that's come through in the guidance, which actually encourages buyers to focus on a single outcome from the model for most contracts, unless they're really significant major contracts. It's encouraging those social requirements perhaps to be less breadth and more depth, focusing in on a particular outcome area from the model. 4th shift that came through my discussions, absolutely loud and clear, not just in the new model, but also across the other context and the policy that I shared. Emphasis on removing barriers for SMEs and VCSEs, particularly through greater focus on proportionate and relevant requirements, really making this about within the scope of this contract, through this contract, what can you deliver? Of course, other means to reduce and remove those barriers too. But that's really clear as well. 2 more. So pre-market engagement, really interesting. That's woven through the Procurement Act, as it is the social value model. A real expectation for buyers to better integrate social value into pre-market engagement to shape and lead to hopefully more proportionate and relevant requirements for different markets. And then last, but very much not least, stronger accountability for delivery of social value commitments across the contract lifecycle, including KPIs, contractual KPIs, getting serious about saying, well, look, if we're committing to social value, we are committing to measuring that through delivery and holding ourselves to account as well. So look, as I said, more shifts are available, but that was a really interesting jump off point from my conversations with panelists. And what I want to do now is just get a sense for the sentiment in the room. This is a very crude and arbitrary scale that I'm asking you to rank these on. But thinking about those 6 shifts, in your gut, where do you sit in terms of, this makes me a little bit nervous, I'm not sure about that. Or actually, yeah, I'm really excited about this shift. So thinking about your organization, your context, how do those shifts land for you on that scale from a little bit unsure about the implications of this shift to feeling excited? So back on Slido, hopefully you've already got that open. Or if not, just have a scan of that QR code and get it on your phone, or join at slido.com and use the code 2222345. How are those shifts making you feel? All of this is anonymous, by the way, so absolutely no sense of who said what. Just really interested to get a sense of how these are landing with people. So you should be able to see all 6, have a rank, and then click send at the bottom, and then we'll get your responses. I'm going to give people 30 seconds or so more to do that. You can see we're getting up to around 100 responses. So again, just what's your gut instinct telling you on those shifts? And then we will get into seeing where we're landing as a group. Okay. Last couple of moments. Brilliant, over 100 responses. Okay, good stuff. So this is a grand reveal. I don't know what we'll come up with, but let's have a look. Okay, interesting. So we've got a kind of curve moving mostly towards the feeling a bit more excited about the first shift, which is better alignment with government's core missions. That's really interesting. Our average is definitely pushing to the right there, albeit some people making some people nervous. That'd be interesting to get into in the conversation. The second shift, similar. Okay, that's good. So we're actually broadly feeling quite excited about more of a focus on jobs and skills. That's really interesting. Notwithstanding some people definitely on the more nervous side. Definitely keen to get both perspectives actually when we come to our panelists on that one. Streamline requirements, focusing more on a small set of outcomes. Interesting. So again, there's a split. I suppose we're kind of talking 33% on the more nervous side and 60 or so on the more excited side, but broadly excited. Of course, the devil's in the detail with this one, isn't it? It's how it's done. Are the questions really relevant, proportionate, etc.? But interesting to see that broadly we're feeling excited about that. Not surprised by this one. Generally feeling excited. I don't think anyone could disagree with this as a principle. But interesting. There may be some nerves around this. I suspect around how we can do it well in practice. So we'll get into that in the conversation. 2 more to go. So greater expectation on pre-market engagement. Interesting. I wondered about this one and whether we would be all on the right. It's something that comes through very clearly as a request when we work with businesses for more of this. So it's interesting to see it's making some people nervous and what might be going on in that one. And last but not least, stronger accountability. Okay, there we go. We've got a nice upward trajectory. Vast majority of people edging towards feeling excited about this one, albeit there's definitely some nerves in the room. Okay, good stuff. Well, look, thank you for engaging on that. I really appreciate that. It's given us a sense of where we're at in a room. If you're thinking, I wish he talked about this shift number 7, please do just pop that in the chat. And let us know because we will not let these limit us as we go through the conversation. But no, really appreciate that. What I'd also ask just before I launch into the next section is please use the Q&A. It's the second tab down, I believe, on the right. We'll try and come to some questions that people have later in the session as we go. But for now, that's your hard work done. Audience, and we're going to get the panel working hard. So if I could ask our panelists to pop on rather their video, and what we're going to do, I've set the panelists a bit of a challenge just to get us going with a bang, and that is, of course, we'll ask folks to introduce themselves, help people understand where you're coming from, your organisation and role, but also within a minute to just give me a sense which of those shifts, or maybe you've got a 7th shift, but which of the shifts with the new social value model you feel is most significant and why? So if you had to pick one. in a minute. What would that be and why? So without further ado, we will get cracking, and I'm going to ask if Kate, you're happy to lead us off. So if you could do an intro and then tell us, if you had to pick one, which shift is significant for you.
Thank you, James. Yes, absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name's Kate Gräfe. I'm a social value director at Samtaler. We're a micro SME social value consultancy, so we generally support organisations bidding into public sector, but also work with private sector. My background is actually procurement and supply chain, so I usually describe myself as gamekeeper turned poacher, because I actually used to help write the policies and awkward questions up until summer 2022. Picking up in terms of the most momentous shift, I am actually going to go with one of the main. I had covered a slightly different piece with James in the background, which may get picked up, but I'm going to go with the focus and the encouragement on looking to pick up one theme overall. And actually, I've noticed that one of the comments that's actually come in on the chat is about a concern about losing the rich diversity of initiatives by streamlining and focus. And I think that that is certainly one of the risk factors. So accepting that there is a piece in terms of consistency and focus and not setting the bar too high. Social value, certainly within looking to change impact, is not necessarily something that can always be boiled down to a single measure. And I think that does tie in with some of the conversation as well, very much on the jobs focus and the encouragement of that, even in advance of the consultation and any changes that may come through.
Brilliant, thanks, Kate. And yeah, I'd definitely be keen to get your readout on how the different businesses you're working with are feeling about that one, and some maybe practical examples of where you think it might potentially limit that diversity. That's a really interesting one. Thank you, Kate. Mike, can I come over to you next to give us a sense of your kind of context and role at EY, and then what's coming out most loud and clear for you?
Morning, everybody. My name is Mike Cook, and I'm a partner at EY. I work in our consulting division. Almost exclusively, the services I provide are to government, and I also activate social value for consulting in the UK for EY. I want to pick up on the accountability point, which I think is to be encouraged and welcomed. Of course, almost all work done with and for and in partnership with the government has an inherent social value impact. When we're going to make it contractual and introduce a jeopardy for suppliers, I would love to see that be a little bit more balanced and see a jeopardy for the authority also, because as we all know, supplying into anybody, the best outcomes come when both the buyer and the supplier are working in a harmonious partnership. And if all that accountability is in one place, then it creates the opportunity for discord. And what we should be seeking is greater harmony to have that social value impact.
Really interesting. It's making me think, one of the pieces that weaves through all of the policy stuff we've touched on is collaboration, greater collaboration, moving away from transactional to collaborative relationships. And I'm keen, Mike, when we come to it, to hear actually about some of those practical examples of where you have been delivering in collaboration and where that might have perhaps an unintended consequence. But no, super interesting. Thanks, Mike. Sam, can I come to you next? Really excited to have you. But yeah, could you kind of help us understand your role in the Cabinet Office? For many of us, that's kind of a bit mysterious as a place. So break that down for us. And then for you, what's the kind of most significant shift?
Yeah, you and me both, James. So I'm Sam Rowbury. I'm Director of Commercial Policy. I'm based in the Cabinet Office, but I'm in the government commercial function, which kind of sits across all of the government departments in terms of the commercial specialists who are running commercial agreements and undertaking procurements. my role in the Cabinet Office is I cover everything to do with the legislation. So that includes the Procurement Act 2023, but also the Social Value Act, and anything where government's using its sort of purchasing power to drive some sort of wider socio-economic objective. My reflection is I wanted to draw out on what the kind of key shifts were. I want to draw out the link to the National Procurement Policy Statement, which you mentioned in your intro, James. So what the NPPS does is that's the new administration setting out its priority outcomes for public procurement as a whole, and all contracting authorities have to have regard to that statement. So that includes councils, NHS, education, but also central government. What PPN 02 does is it's that central government saying this is how we are going to implement the requirements of the NPPS in relation to social value. So these are our priorities for central government departments and arm's length bodies and how we take forward social value in our procurement. So I think that's a really interesting shift. Before we had kind of social value, and the PPN 0620 was a wide range of priorities, but now we're really seeing this focus down onto a set of things that the new administration sees as the kind of key priorities that it wants to use public procurement to deliver for. And I think it's worth looking at that NPPS document, not just to look at the social value aspects, but the wider outcomes that government regards as important for public procurement. Thanks.
Lovely. Yeah, no, it does feel like there's a much more coherent golden thread, doesn't it, through all of this? So we'll certainly touch on that. Last but very much not least, I'm going to come to Becky. So over to you, Becky.
Thank you. So I'm Becky Vowles. I'm the head of social impact within the government segment of Sodexo. So for those that don't know Sodexo, we're a large global company. We cover catering, facilities management, and workplace services. We're quite large, employ over 400,000 people worldwide, but around 30,000 people in the UK. I work really closely with the bid teams around central government contracts in kind of wider agency contracts and supporting that bid activity. So work really closely with the MACs generally. I think for me, in terms of the main shifts, generally quite positive, I think, in all of them. So, you know, everyone wants to see kind of greater engagement before bidding, it's all those kind of things. I think for me, one of the biggest shifts is that stronger accountability piece and looking at a lot of the bid commitments that we put being translated into KPIs. So we've already seen that happening in quite a few of the bids that we've had over the last kind of year or so, 18 months. So I think it's been going that way anyway. And it's great in turns intention into impact, allows you to measure that and evidence that. But I think, you know, though it will drive kind of greater rigor, perhaps around the bidding and ensuring that the people are actually doing what they commit to. I do fear that there's maybe a potential there to stifle innovation and ambition a little bit if you've got financial KPIs attached to what it is you're putting forward. So I think maybe there's a bit of a balance there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Becky. So super. We have got plenty to be getting into in that. I think where I'd like to go first is perhaps where we ended there. So accountability, both you, Becky, and Mike, you raised that. Mike, maybe first of all, and I'll come to Becky, but Mike, it'd be great to hear a bit more about what you mean when you say shared accountability, and you know whether this is going to have some kind of unintended consequences, and maybe you could tell us a bit about a project where that kind of collaboration across boundaries is integral to it working, and how the new approach with greater accountability might change how EY would approach that kind of project in the future.
Thank you. And Oh goodness, you asked me to talk about one of our social value projects, and that could see me going on for ages. So I'll do my best to not get carried away in a moment. For me, that partnership is really important because often I find to have the greatest social impact requires access to a multitude of services. So sometimes that's us working with SMEs, social enterprises, charities, all sorts of things, but also government agencies or services, social services, youth services, for example. And I think if all the accountability rests with the suppliers, then we could end up in a position where the authority believes, great, I've got the supplier on the hook to deliver this, and therefore they're going to deliver it, and I can hold their feet to the fire, and job done, I can move on to the next thing. A really good example of a project that we were doing we were working in the West Midlands region, both for the authority and the police service, and we managed to get those two clients, led by two different EY teams, to all come together. We came together as a trio to conceive a programme which then saw us access, exactly as I described, youth services, social services, the NHS, to work with an at-risk of exclusion group of young people, where they created a short video, and the police service gave up their time. Their police officers came in. We did work with their police officers to show how we engaged with young people when we're on the street to improve breaking down the barriers of engagement between uniformed personnel, but also adults in social services. So these young people learned to engage with adults who typically had authority over them in all their interactions, to normalise that relationship and give the young people some agency in those conversations. The upshot was that the short videos, we had them professionally produced, and they were showcased in the IMAX cinema in Birmingham with all of those adults and all of those government agencies present, along with the adults who care for the young people, some their parents, some their foster parents, some adopted parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, you know, the whole caboodle. And in that moment, for that evening, those young people were celebrated multiple times, and they just had a positive, uplifting experience. And for adults who were participating in the upbringing of those children and helping them progress to more positive pathways than they perhaps were on before the programme was launched, they felt that celebration of them, and it really demonstrated to them how a positive pathway could lead to both positive affirmation and then positive outcomes. One got a scholarship with RADA. A couple came in and did some work-based experience with EY and got mentorship from our school leaver apprentices, etc. Everybody will have examples of programs like this. But the magic in it, the thing that really made it work, was that we, with the authority that were buying our services, worked together to access all manner of other services that we certainly couldn't have sort of motivated without that push to do something together in a shared, purposeful way, without necessarily a contractual accountability one way or the other. We did it because the opportunity was there and people were motivated to take advantage of the opportunity. And I would hate for that to be lost in a contractual argy-bargy.
Do you think, Matt, I'm not expecting you can necessarily answer policy or EUI's policy on this, but look, if you had a bid, a tender land, and you were thinking we could do something like that, does this new context around greater accountability make you more hesitant to make commitments that do depend on, external bodies and stakeholders? Or does it just mean we've got to properly think this through and be confident in our delivery plan and methodology, which is the flip side of it?
In terms of commitments, it comes back to what Becky said about the KPIs. So in terms of a commitment we can make, which will have a KPI on it, then we can only promise absolutely to deliver the thing on which we have no dependencies. We will write in additional value from the partnership, which we try to achieve in all of our work, whether that's public or private. But fundamentally, if at the point of submission you are having to make a commitment on which you will be held to account, then you can only promise the things that you are confident you can deliver without dependency.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's making me reflect, actually. We had a really fascinating session yesterday on this challenge around 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. And the businesses we're working with who are being most ambitious about this are collaborating across boundaries, going in and working with local councils, employment and skills teams. And, it does require that, doesn't it? Some of the more, meaningful, impactful initiatives. I'd like to come to Kate actually on this and get your take on it. I know it's something that you've been thinking about, and perhaps my question for you is also thinking from a small business perspective. I know Samtaler, you think a lot and work a lot with small, medium-sized enterprises. What are some of the kind of positives and perhaps challenges that this shift will bring for that cohort?
Firstly, I suppose just to say, actually, we work mainly with large corporates rather than SMEs.
Okay.
However, I think that I do wonder if that there is an element of an advantage here, actually, from an SME perspective with the accountability. I think that we have definitely worked with varying sizes of organisations where, I hate to say it, but social value has become an element of the contract where there's been a bit of how do we look to game the system to be able to win the bid because of the importance that's put on it. And the danger that can lead to kind of very much aligns with the point that Mike was making around actually ensuring that things that are going into bids are things that can actually be delivered and being held to account for that. And I guess also aligned with that, the piece about the accompanying wraparound with the Procurement Act and looking at wider transparency. So actually there are more reputational impacts if something is not delivered for social value in much the same way as there would be for any other component. So it's very much looking at embedding and putting social value on a par within that contract for it from an importance perspective, with other particular details.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. Agrees. Really, really interesting. I guess, Sam, I'm interested to hear your reflections on what you've heard from Mike and Kate. I know it'll be something that you've been thinking about even beyond social value, right? The contract management approach and accountability. But what do you see as the implications of this shift for you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both what Kate and Mike said. So I think I'd say the focus that we want with this is absolutely not just on the supply. It's totally what Kate was saying in terms of, we know there's some bid candy that's been put out there with people putting things into bids which they're not delivering. And it's not often that an authority is going to terminate a contract just because the social value element hasn't been delivered. So we do want to put more focus on making sure suppliers come forward with things. I mean, actually, as you said, James, really think about how they're going to deliver the things they're putting in their bid. But as Mike said, this is a joint thing. There needs to be a partnership there, just in the way that you would expect the contract to be run against any of your KPIs in there. You can't outsource risk. The contracting authority needs to manage the contract properly. They need to be putting the right level of focus and interest and support and engagement into the social value elements of the contract just as much as the wider delivery and performance of that contract. So that's really what we're trying to say here. It's to elevate the focus of the social value KPI and make sure that, yes, the commitments are delivered. And there's plenty of ways of making sure that you can incentivize suppliers to exceed those commitments and deliver even more. But let's make sure that they're robust and actually get delivered on the ground rather than forgotten.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that brings us back, Sam, to the general perception in the room of 300 or so people is this is exciting. But as ever, it's about how we do it in a way that avoids some of those perhaps unintended consequences, how we do that meaningfully. I'm keen maybe to move us to one of the other shifts that we all touched on, which is this streamlining of the focus. And to be honest, I might group this in with jobs and skills. They kind of maybe go a bit hand in hand, reading between the lines, right? We've got a guidance that says focus in on one outcome area. We've then got more max that are around jobs and skills, and we've also got a consultation that's exploring, albeit the conclusions are not yet out, but exploring even strengthening that commitment. So Becky, I'm really interested to hear from a Sodexo perspective, how are you thinking about that shift, and what are some of the kind of practical implementations for how you're planning ahead, how you will manage your social value programming and bid commitments in relation to that?
Yeah. So I think from our point of view, well, from my personal point of view, I'll start with. I think it's great that there's a focus on upskilling and reskilling and bring people in, etc. My slight fear, and I've seen it quite a bit in the chat, is that becomes all we focus on, and I think we have to maybe. I suppose my slight concern around it is that actually some of the other really good things that we can do maybe get left behind, or we're not able to kind of show and demonstrate within the bids. I think in terms of planning for it, my feeling is that we do a lot anyway, and I think most big responsible companies do a lot around skilling their people, looking at diversity inclusion, looking at who we can bring in, breaking down barriers to employment. I think for us, that's almost become part of our bread and butter, that we're constantly looking at how we can improve as an organisation, how we can improve our people, and how we can diversify. So I think for us, it's very much that challenge of, where I feel we do really well. How do we keep building on that, and how do we keep improving in order to show that additionality? And that's the real kind of challenge, I think, when it comes to these contracts, is when we're pushing ourselves, how do you keep building on that and keep showing that additionality? I think for me, the beauty and the skills and the barriers piece is that sometimes when you look at it in relation to some of the other MAC questions, you can bring it in there, and that gives you a much more kind of interesting solution than just looking at purely through a recruitment type lens in working with SMEs on that side. So I think it will probably make us think about it a bit differently to broaden it out, but I hope that isn't all we end up looking at, I suppose, is my slight concern.
No, it's really interesting, and this will be different for different markets, but your reflection, actually thinking about your market, maybe being able to differentiate yourself might become a little bit harder if we focus in on that, because actually there's a high bar already. The counterbalance to that is there are significant challenges we were hearing yesterday across the country in terms of those barriers. There's still many cohorts of folks out there who we need to be supporting as well. But it's really, really interesting perspective. I want to come to Kate next, if that's all right, Kate, and just ask you a little bit around, I suppose, part A, how that lands for you, and whether you've got any more general reflections. But specifically, I've been seeing in the chat some questions, concerns around, well, what might this mean for organisations who perhaps aren't in a particular area, they're delivering remotely, and they're thinking, oh gosh, am I going to have to kind of create jobs or at least improve skills on every contract? It's a really interesting one for those organisations, and I suppose types of services that might feel a little bit less this is in their sweet spot, or are they missing a trick? How might you advise those organisations, Kate?
Well, firstly, I think it fits in with one of the other shifts, which is the piece about pre-market engagement, and needing to very much bring social value to the table, both from a buyer and a supplier side, to have that conversation about actually what's realistic and the intent. And I guess that feels like, for me, it also sits behind and maybe picks up on Rebecca's point about the ability to broaden or be a bit more specific from a contract point of view about how to apply that MAC. What is it we're trying to achieve? I think everybody understands the main overall government policy aim in terms of the fact that in order to grow our economy, there's a piece about better skills, better employment. I think the challenge for that around some of the fair jobs are certainly for some organisations around, salary, real living wage and national minimum wage increasing, national insurance contributions. So that creates just a little bit, we need to be realistic about that. And I think also as well, the emphasis of the model is rightly on making sure that the right kind of jobs and skills are being developed. Let's face it, one of the fundamental issues around the economy and growth at the moment is about productivity. And I think that in applying the model, if we are going to have the focus on jobs and skills, it's trying to make sure that we don't end up with that being a little bit of a carryover from the old model, a little bit of a tick box and just trying to race to creating those jobs. And I genuinely mean that from a supplier and a buyer perspective. And actually what is going to have that overarching social mobility, increase in productivity aim, because that's ultimately what the mission is targeted at. How you do that within that framework, I think, is very much a case-by-case basis. But I always would say, let's have a look at the end aim that we're trying to get to here. And so from a supplier point of view, that I think enables a conversation with a purchasing authority to be able to explore a bit more of the art of the possible, and maybe bring in some of that diversity of solutions again.
Lovely, yeah, and I love that you kind of weaved in, what's the right word, the pre-market engagement element to this. Is absolutely right, Kate, isn't it? It all comes down to how you do it, and if you're engaging and talking to the markets and thinking, okay, well, this is where jobs and skills is relevant for you, you're much more likely to get towards a satisfactory set of requirements and then ultimately outcomes on that piece. But Sam, I'm really interested to hear your reflections on this. I'm not, well, I know you won't be able to give us the conclusions of the consultation as yet, but hearing folks talk about that, the implications around jobs and skills, we know that's a focus in the consultation. There's also a bit in there around perhaps being more prescriptive around locations, actually saying, this is where we'd like to target social value for this contract. So how have you and colleagues at the Cabinet Office been thinking through some of the implications of those shifts?
So, and I've seen some of this in the chat. So some of the feedback that we've had on the current rules is that the restrictions in the legislation around award criteria being relevant and proportionate to the contract in social value can mean you're restricted in the way where you determine that social value can be delivered. It's got to be where the contract's going to be delivered. One of the things we're looking at is whether we could create some more flexibility in that. So the contracting authority, exactly as Kate was saying, in the pre-market engagement phase, they go out to the market, they see what social value can be delivered. If there's a supplier who say, actually, I've got a really strong proposition, but it's based where we're based rather than being off in another part of the country. If that aligns with what the contracting authority is looking for, can we give them more flexibility within the rules to be able to determine the location where the social value gets delivered? And there's lots of opportunities in that. For example, in central government, we're not so good at determining where we can have most impact through social value, because we're not as close to the local skills and issues and blockers that we are saying a local council. There they can walk down the corridor, talk to the regeneration unit, talk to the strategy unit, work out what's going on in their area and make a change. In central government, it's harder to do that. So there's opportunities for us within central government departments to look at how we use that additional flexibility.
Thanks, Sam. That's really interesting that's the lens that Cabinet Office and departments think through, is additional flexibility. So this is all about responding to the feedback that's come through previously around things being perhaps too prescriptive. It's really interesting. We've got about 10 minutes or so left, and I think there's some really interesting questions coming through in the chat that I'd like to come to. So I'm just looking at one in particular that I think would be really interesting to get into with you, Becky. It maybe comes back to one of the concerns you raised earlier around, are we going to, is this fundamentally going to reduce the investment and time we spend in certain areas versus jobs and skills? I think it's from Penny Arnold, who asks, does the new social value model provide sufficient proportionate emphasis on protecting our planet and climate crisis? I know it's something that's close to your heart, Becky. So what do you think about the shifts around this?
Well, I'm an environmentalist. I think we can always do more. I think sometimes what we're seeing coming through from central government departments, etc., is that actually more and more of this is being built into the contracts, and they're relying less on the MACs to deliver, certainly around carbon reductions and net zero carbon ambition, and energy efficiencies, and kind of the wider sustainability piece. So though I'm what we're seeing is it being asked less within the contract, within the bids, is questions under the social value model. What we're seeing is that it's being actually kind of built into the contract that you will help support us deliver this. And so I actually think in the departments that we're working with, that side's maturing, and it's becoming less of a what could you do and what could you support with us around this to a deliverable. So the questions we're being asked are, how are you going to deliver this? And it's not being used necessarily in the other side. So though I think the government focus is, when you read kind of the themes, it's slightly different. It's a bit more focused around kind of energy security. I don't see it being lost necessarily within the contracts we're getting. I think it's actually maturing and getting more strengthened. From my point of view personally, I always think we could do more, and we should be aiming for more, and we should be doing it quicker, as we all do. It's a massive issue. It's a massive threat to us all. But actually, I'm slightly buoyed by the fact that it's being built into contracts, and therefore it's becoming key deliverables.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Becky. We talked a lot at the conference so far about the evolution of social value as a concept, and I suppose that principle of additionality, it changes, doesn't it, as we move through years and decades, and things that we might have seen as just as going above and beyond 5 years ago perhaps do not anymore. So, but I suppose it's nice to hear that actually some of that's being built in as just core requirements and expectations, which is interesting. On the subject of things that are kind of maybe being lost or moved around, I'm interested to see, it's quite a specific point, but would be interested to see your reflection on this, Sam. And we'll come to another couple of questions for Kate and Mike. From Jess Keane, who's noted that under the new procurement model, defence clients appear to have greater flexibility and exemptions when it comes to applying social value requirements. And the question from Jess is, what do these actually mean in practice? How might they impact social value? I think, just to add to that, it's really interesting, obviously, the wider context around defence spending, defence industrial review, strategic review that's come out. There's all this focus, and it strikes me as a massive opportunity for social value. So it's interesting to see, can you bring to life any of the thinking around what that is actually getting at, why it's in there, and what it might mean in practice for bidders to the Ministry of Defence?
Yeah, sure. So obviously defence is very specialist. There's a massive kind of long supply chain involved in defence projects, and they've obviously got a whole set of different rules which allow them to operate in a kind of more security-based way. So it's different from your kind of standard common goods and services procurement that you might see happening in every other department. As you said, there is a new defence industrial strategy, which is setting out a whole range of ways that the Ministry of Defence thinks it can deliver additional value, whether that's supporting small businesses down through the supply chain, whether that's delivering more in terms of jobs and skills, but also in terms of helping veterans into work and gaining new skills. So while the social value model itself isn't mandated on the Ministry of Defence, there's plenty of opportunities for them to take and define their own objectives and how they deliver social value, and that is what they're doing for their specific market.
So that's interesting. In other words, MOD bidders don't put social value in the bin.
Oh no, God! They may have a slightly different set of priorities, but they will still fit within the mission, and they will still very much be important. And that's a very clear message from the government that the increase in defence spending must be used to deliver additional benefits to the UK.
Great. Well, I think lots of organisations will be pleased to hear that, because I know there's lots of organisations in that sector who really invested in their social value approach over the past years. Good stuff. I'm going to ask one more question of Mike and Kate, if I may, and I'm going to ask you to be brief, if that's okay, and then we'll come to just a very short closing reflection from each panellist, where I might ask you to just pull out one key takeaway from the conversation today. But question is an interesting one from Stuart, who's said, there's been lots of talk about pre-market engagement, which all sounds great. However, when a tender is published with a social value requirement, we aren't then able to have conversations relating to social value. How do we get around this? Mike and Kate, maybe I'll come to you first. Mike, how can we get around some of the challenges around doing pre-market engagement well on social value? Have you seen any great examples, and how did they get around some of the challenges?
Have I seen any great examples? I think it's a super interesting one. I've certainly been following some of the Tussle information, which has noted the levels of pre-market engagement going up quite considerably, which I think is positive in terms of a policy outcome. I think there's still maybe some work to do in terms of honing the two-way conversation. I think Mike earlier on mentioned about delivery being a two-way partnership. I think actually that's the same for the whole of the contract cycle. And I'm not sure entirely how much that is happening. I think there are some genuine, very good taking on board comments that are coming from suppliers around all areas, including social value. So I certainly have seen examples of we're thinking of looking at requirements in this area. Is that something that you would be able to meet? Have you got any other suggestions? Innovation, asking those questions. So, and genuinely open to then including them in the responses, which is absolutely vital. And I think that is quite critical, because one of the downsides that I've heard is that the pre-market engagement sometimes is being done in a bit of a scattergun way. So I think if it happens, it has to be meaningful. And thinking maybe about ways of doing that. Central government maybe not so much of an issue, but for local government or smaller organisations that might have a number of smaller contracts, whether there's something that can be done that covers more groups or sectors or industries of requirements, or the kind of things that are going on locally as a two-way conversation, because doing it for every single contract, I've been there, covering like 400 contracts with a third of them coming up every year. It's next to impossible. It'd be a full-time job just to do the pre-market engagement.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about implications of some of these shifts. There's a huge resource implication around that, right? Isn't there? Of both buyers and
it is, but it's all about shifting. And I'm pretty sure Sam will agree with this. Having been in this sector since 2010, and national procurement strategies back in the day were always focusing the resource on pre-market, pre-procurement process, getting the specification right, understanding the market maturity, having conversations when you can outside the process, help streamline the process, run it more efficiently, and you're much more likely to have a contract at the end that is going to be deliverable. And then again, it's about focusing the effort on the partnership for that delivery. So not the
Yeah.
focus on the procurement part of the process, which the old regulations probably drove.
Yes. Absolutely. Mike, you're going to have to forgive me. My poor chairing means I've not quite left you time to come in on that point. But what I will do is I'll give you the closing slot so you can bring the curtain down. But what I'm going to ask our panelists to do now is just give me a 30-second reflection to close the conversation. And perhaps it's something, maybe a key takeaway or something. I'd like to leave people excited, something that really excites you about the new model and what it's signaling to us. So if we go with Becky first, then Sam, then Kate, then Mike.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think it's that clarity that I'm looking forward to. So rather than guessing, I think sometimes that what the client wants, the beauty of this model in the changes and potentially from the consultation is that it will help bring us clarity, which means we can deliver what the client is looking for with more confidence, and make things more impactful and leave a better legacy. I think that's what I'm looking forward to collectively.
Lovely. Go for it, Sam.
I just say I've been really inspired and excited by this whole discussion, actually. I mean, it's really great to hear from Becky and Mike and Kate that things are changing on the ground, and the kind of things that we think we're seeing a shift in, they are happening. And so, yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity to engage with this. I mean, I think often with policy, you put things in place and it can be years before you actually see there's changes kind of coming through. And we saw that with the 2012 Act. We're still on a journey with all of this, but it's good to see that change is starting to happen.
Yes, love that message. Change is happening. Absolutely, Sam. Kate, go for it.
Yeah, I love the fact that similar to Rebecca, there's a piece about clarity. I think actually that golden thread in terms of the link to the missions, if you're actually going to look to transform something, that just feels fairly fundamental in terms of strategy. So I think that's great. And equally, if you look at the original missions as they were drafted, they've actually got social value kind of embedded within them. So it feels like there's a shift to that embedding as part of strategy and policy generally, rather than a bolt-on add-on tick box.
Yeah, love that. That's what business who've been doing this really well, been talking about, hasn't it, for years, making it core to business, and it feels like it's making it core to government as well, which is great. Mike, round us off.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and particularly the questions in the chat, actually. It definitely demonstrates that we're all beginning to collaborate already on operationalising the change. And so when, as operators, we start being operational, we find all the bits of uncertainty, the challenges, and so we're all talking about the things that might go wrong. At its core, though, what this does is prioritises the whole of the government and the whole of the supply chain helping government into the things that the government thinks are the most important. And if we get that right, then what it absolutely does is amplifies and accelerates social value for the most sort of vulnerable and fragile parts of our country. And I think that's something really worth going after. And it doesn't stop each of us as an organisation having our own things that we prioritise, but at least when working to government, we're creating a sense of national endeavour that will shift the sort of operation of the country for the better. So I think that's something really worth going after.
I'm glad I asked you to end, Mike, on a suitably inspiring message. What better way to end and bring us back to the purpose, the reason we're doing this. So thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thanks, everyone in the chat. I'm sorry we haven't got to all the questions. We've done our best. If you do have more questions and you want to pick them up later in the day, I'm going to be in the networking session. It's the second tab on your home screen, and there's a little room there that is social value model focused. So we can maybe pick up there. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference and see you later.